My name is Claire Donovan. I am 34 years old. The night my mother-in-law stood in front of 42 members of her family at her husband's retirement party and told the entire room that I was, and I am quoting her exactly, basically just a very expensive babysitter who got lucky. I was standing 6 feet behind her holding a glass of sparkling water, wearing the pearl earrings her son had given me on our wedding day. I did not set down the glass. I did not raise my voice. I did not leave the room. I stood there and let every single person in that ballroom turn to look at me, and I smiled the kind of smile that takes years to learn. The quiet kind. The kind that means I already know something you don't. What none of them knew. Not Renata, not her husband Franklin, not the 40 guests holding their champagne flutes and waiting to see what I would do. Was that the $150,000 check sitting in Franklin's business account? The money he had already started spending on his post-retirement startup dream was mine. And it had a revocation clause I had written in myself. This is that story. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand what happened in that ballroom without understanding what happened in the 7 years before it. My name before I married was Claire Whitmore. I grew up in Davenport, Iowa, the daughter of a high school math teacher and a woman who spent 30 years running the accounts receivable department for a regional hospital. My parents were not wealthy. They were precise. My mother kept a ledger of every household expense dating back to 1989. She taught me that money is not glamorous. It is a language, and if you learn to speak it fluently, no one can lie to you in it. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Iowa with a degree in finance, passed my CPA exam on the first attempt at 23, and by 26 I was a senior associate at a mid-size wealth management firm in Chicago called Alderton Partners. I was not flashy. I wore conservative blazers and kept my hair, which is dark auburn and falls just past my shoulders, in a low twist most days. I drove a 5-year-old Subaru. I brought my lunch to work in a blue thermal bag my mother had given me as a promotion gift. I built things slowly and carefully, and I was very, very good at it. I met Marcus Hale at a client dinner in the spring of the year I turned 27. He was not my client. He was seated across the table from me talking about a commercial real estate deal in a way that was somehow both technically rigorous and funny. And when dessert arrived, he slid his business card across the table and wrote his cell number on the back in pen. Because, he said later, he was not sure I would actually call the firm's main line. He was right. I called the cell number. We had coffee that Thursday. We were engaged 14 months later. I believed I was gaining a partner and a family. I was half right. Renata Hale was 56 years old when I met her. She was a woman of considerable social architecture. She had spent 30 years as the wife of Franklin Hale, who had built a modest but respected regional accounting firm called Hale and Associates in the western suburbs of Chicago. They lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Elmhurst with a finished basement, a rose garden Renata photographed obsessively for her Facebook page, and a sense of family hierarchy that had been calcifying for decades. Renata was the kind of woman who asked your opinion and then immediately told you why you were wrong. She had a way of complimenting you that always left a small bruise. She told me at our first dinner that I had such a sensible face, and that she was relieved Marcus had chosen someone grounded rather than someone decorative. I stored that sentence in a drawer in the back of my mind and left it there. Marcus had one sibling, a younger brother named Derek, who was 30 at the time I met the family and who worked in marketing for a sports apparel company. Derek was easy, funny, the kind of person who diffuses tension by pretending it doesn't exist. His wife, a woman named Trish, had been married into the Hale family for 3 years before me and had developed a specific survival skill I noticed immediately. She always agreed with Renata. Always. With a particular tilt of her head and a soft, affirming sound that had become, I suspect, entirely involuntary. I did not develop this skill. I tried in the beginning to engage Renata as an intellectual equal. This was my first mistake. Renata did not want an equal. She wanted an audience. The pattern revealed itself in layers over the first 2 years of my marriage. I will give you 3 examples, because 3 is enough to see the shape of a thing. The first happened 6 months after our wedding. Marcus and I had decided not to take a honeymoon immediately because he was in the middle of a deal and I was transitioning to a new role at Alderton that required my full attention for the first quarter. We planned a trip to Portugal for the following spring. At a Sunday dinner in November, Renata mentioned to the table that Marcus had told her we were not going on a honeymoon because I was too focused on work to take time off. That was not what either of us had said, but Marcus laughed and moved on, and the sentence just sat there, unrebutted, becoming its own small truth in the room. The second example came 18 months later, at Marcus's firm holiday party. Marcus worked in commercial lending and had built a genuinely strong client portfolio. At the party, a colleague of his asked how we had first connected, and Renata, who had not been part of that conversation and who had arrived at the table 6 seconds earlier, answered before either of us could. Marcus has always been good at networking, she said. He found Claire at a client dinner. She was very persistent. I had not been persistent. I had answered a phone call, but the room had already moved on, and Renata was already refreshing her drink, and Marcus was talking to someone else, and the sentence was already becoming another small brick in the wall she was building. Not a wall to keep me out, a wall to keep me small. The third example is the one that removed any remaining question I had about whether this was intentional. It was a Sunday in April, the year before the retirement party. Marcus and I had just purchased our home, a 4-bedroom Craftsman in Evanston with a covered porch and a yard big enough for the vegetable garden I had wanted for years. We paid cash for a significant portion of the down payment, my portion. I had been saving and investing since my first job, and the down payment drew largely on accounts I had built independently over a decade. We did not advertise this. We were simply a couple buying a house together. At a family Easter dinner 3 weeks after we moved in, Renata was showing photographs of the new house to her sister, a woman named Gloria, who lives in Naperville. I was in the kitchen helping to plate the lamb when I heard Renata say through the open doorway, "Marcus found a beautiful place. He works so hard. He really provided for them." I stood with a serving spoon in my hand and listened to my contribution to our shared life be erased in one sentence. I put the spoon down. I walked back to the table. I sat down. I did not say anything. But something settled inside me, something quiet and very cold, like a decision that had been forming for a long time and had finally found its shape. Now I need to tell you about Franklin's startup, because that is where the story actually turns. Franklin Hale had spent 33 years running his accounting firm. He was meticulous, careful, genuinely skilled, and by most measures, a successful man. He was also, for as long as I had known him, restless. He had an idea he had been nurturing for years, a software platform designed to help small accounting firms manage client portfolios and regulatory compliance in one integrated system. It was not a bad idea. In fact, when he first described it to me at a dinner in February, about 14 months before the retirement party, I found it technically interesting. He had a working prototype, a small advisory team, and a clear sense of the market gap he was targeting. What he did not have was capital. His firm's sale, which he had been negotiating for 18 months, would cover his retirement comfortably, but left very little liquid runway for a new venture. He needed a bridge investment, someone to fund the first year of development and operational costs while he finalized the sale and assembled a proper funding round. At a quiet dinner in March, just the 4 of us, Franklin explained the situation. He was looking for $200,000 to get the company through its first 12 months. He had already secured $50,000 from a former colleague. He needed $150,000 more. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me. I looked at Franklin. I said I would think about it. I want you to understand what that meant. I did not say yes. I said I would think about it. I went home that night and I spent the next 11 days doing what I do. I analyzed the prototype documentation Franklin sent me. I reviewed the advisory team's backgrounds. I researched the competitive landscape. I ran projections on 3 scenarios: conservative, moderate, and optimistic, and I identified the primary execution risks. On the 12th day, I called Franklin directly, not Marcus, Franklin, and I said I was willing to invest $150,000 under specific terms. I would receive a convertible note with an 8% annual interest rate, a cap on conversion, and a revocation clause that allowed me to recall the principal within 90 days if certain operational milestones were not met. Franklin said yes. His lawyer and my lawyer drafted the agreement. It was signed on a Thursday evening in April. Marcus knew. Renata did not. I want to be precise about why I kept the investment private. It was not secrecy for strategic purposes, at least not initially. Marcus and I discussed it, and we both agreed that mixing family and business was already complicated enough, without making my financial involvement a subject of Sunday dinner conversation. Renata had a way of absorbing information and redeploying it in ways that shifted power dynamics, and we both quietly understood that the less she knew about the structure of our financial life, the less leverage she had to revise the story of it. We were not hiding anything malicious. We were simply protecting something real. That distinction matters. The retirement party was scheduled for the second Saturday of October. Renata had been planning it for 4 months. The venue was a private event room at a club in Oak Brook that seated 60. The guest list was 42 people, family, former colleagues, long-standing clients, neighbors. Renata had selected the menu, designed the centerpieces, and written a program that included a 2-paragraph biography of Franklin that she had apparently drafted herself and which used the phrase "a legacy of excellence" twice. She had also organized a brief program of toasts and remarks after dinner. She had not asked me to speak. She had asked Trish to read a poem she had selected. She had asked Derek to say a few words. She had asked Marcus to give the main toast. She had asked me to help manage the caterer's timeline because, she said, "You're so organized, Claire. You'll know when to signal them." I arrived with Marcus at 6:47 in the evening. The room smelled like white roses and warm bread. Renata was near the entrance in a floor-length navy gown, greeting guests with the precision of a woman who had been rehearsing this night for months. She hugged me briefly when we arrived, the kind of hug that involves no actual pressure, and told me I looked very put together. I thanked her and found my seat. The dinner was pleasant. The food was good. Franklin was genuinely moved by the turnout and showed a warmth across the evening that reminded me why I had liked him in the first place. I ate my salmon and talked to Gloria from Naperville, who turned out to be funny and unexpectedly blunt, and I watched the room with the particular attention I had learned to give rooms that contain Renata. I was waiting for something, not because I had planned for anything specific to happen, but because 7 years of watching her operate had taught me that events with Renata at the center always had a moment. There was always a moment. It came at 8:19 in the evening between the main course and dessert, when Renata stood to make her own remarks before the formal toast program began. She spoke beautifully about Franklin for 4 minutes. Genuinely beautiful. And then she turned to the room and began to talk about the family, the people who had supported him. She spoke about Marcus, her firstborn, with a warmth and specificity that made people nod. She mentioned Derek and Trish together in a sentence that called them the heartbeat of the next generation. And then she turned slightly, not fully toward me, but enough, and said, "And of course Marcus's wife Claire has been with us for 7 years now. She helps a lot with the children during family gatherings. She's very good with the little ones." She paused and let her eyes sweep the room. "Really, she's been basically just a very expensive babysitter who got lucky." She laughed. It was a light laugh, the kind that says, "This is a joke," and 2 or 3 people in the room produced uncertain smiles. The kind people make when they are not sure if they are allowed to laugh. 42 people turned to look at me. I was standing near the back wall. I had gotten up 30 seconds earlier to check on the dessert timing, which was my assigned role. I was holding a glass of sparkling water. I looked at Renata. I smiled. I did not move. I did not speak. The moment passed, as moments always do. And Renata turned back to the room and began talking about the new startup and Franklin's exciting next chapter and how proud the family was. And I stood there and made a decision. If you have ever been in a room where someone used laughter to erase you in front of witnesses, you know the particular quality of that silence. Drop a comment and tell me, because I need to know that I am not the only person who has stood in a room full of people who just watched it happen and said nothing. If this story is landing close to home, please subscribe and stay with me, because what happens next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. I did not do anything that night. I want to be clear about that. I smiled. I helped signal the caterer at the correct time. I stood beside Marcus during the formal toast. I applauded when Franklin blew out the candles on his celebration cake, and I drove home with my husband in a car where neither of us spoke for the first 12 minutes. When Marcus finally said, "She didn't mean it like that," I said, "I know." That was the entire conversation. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not reach for reassurance. I just sat with what I knew, which was this. $150,000 was sitting in Franklin Hale's business account, and it had my name attached to it. And the revocation clause had a 90-day window, and we were currently at 61 days. Monday morning, I called my attorney, a woman named Sandra Okafor, who practices business law in Chicago and who has the specific quality I most value in a professional, which is that she gives you the answer to the question you are asking without editorializing. I told her I needed to understand the precise mechanics of the revocation clause in the convertible note. She walked me through it in 11 minutes. The clause was clear. If the operational milestones outlined in Section 4 of the agreement had not been met by day 90, I could issue a formal recall notice and the principal was due within 30 days. I asked her what the current milestone status was. She said that was a factual question I would need to answer, not her. I thanked her and hung up. I spent the next 4 days reviewing every document Franklin had sent me in the 8 months since the investment. The prototype had not been completed on schedule. The advisory team had lost one of its 3 members in August. The market research deliverable that was due in September had not been delivered. None of these were catastrophic individually, but taken together and measured against the milestone language in Section 4, they constituted a pattern of underperformance that fell clearly within the conditions that would trigger the revocation clause. I documented everything. I organized it in a folder on my desktop labeled with the project name and the date range. I printed it. I put it in a manila folder. I put the manila folder in my work bag, and I left it there for 18 days. I want to explain what those 18 days felt like, because this is the part people always ask about. It did not feel like power. It did not feel like revenge. It felt like standing in a very quiet room with a door in front of you and knowing that you can open it whenever you choose and that no one else in the world knows the door exists. I went to work. I prepared year-end projections for 3 of my clients at Alderton. I had dinner with a friend named Joanna who makes me laugh until my jaw hurts. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday and bought winter squash and a bunch of dahlias, dark orange ones, and put them on my kitchen table. I called my mother and talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. I was not stewing. I was not scheming. I was simply allowing things to be what they already were and deciding with great care what to do about it. On day 22 after the retirement party, Renata called me. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, which was unusual. She called my cell directly, not Marcus's, which was even more unusual. Her voice was warm and unhurried, which told me she wanted something. "Claire, sweetheart, I was thinking it would be so lovely to have a small family dinner next Sunday. Nothing fancy. Just us, Derek and Trish, Franklin. I thought you could bring that pasta salad you made at Easter." I said that sounded nice and that I would check with Marcus. She said, "Oh, don't worry about Marcus. He already confirmed. I just wanted to make sure you knew." She had called her son to confirm the plan before calling his wife to notify her. Not invite. Notify. I said I would see her Sunday, and I ended the call. Sunday dinner was unremarkable. Renata served a pot roast. Franklin talked about the startup with an enthusiasm that was genuine and a progress update that was, if I was being precise, approximately 40% optimistic revision. He mentioned that the prototype was coming along. I asked one question, just one, about the timeline for the milestone deliverable. Franklin looked briefly at his plate and said they were running slightly behind but confident. Renata changed the subject to Derek and Trish's upcoming anniversary trip. I smiled and passed the bread basket. After dinner, while Marcus helped Franklin with the dishes and Derek and Trish were in the living room, Renata and I were briefly alone in the dining room. She was gathering the centerpiece, a low arrangement of cream roses, and without looking up, she said, "You know, Franklin really appreciates the confidence the family has shown in his project. Marcus's support has meant everything to him. Not your support, not the investment, Marcus's support." I looked at her and said, "I'm glad it's been helpful." She looked up then, and her eyes held that particular quality I had learned to read over 7 years, the slight assessment in them, the check to see if she had placed the sentence correctly. I held her gaze for a moment and then looked at the dahlias on the sideboard, which she had put there from her garden, and said they were beautiful. She looked away first. She always did, eventually. Day 29. I was at my desk at Alderton Partners on a Wednesday at 11 minutes past 10 in the morning when I opened my laptop, navigated to the document folder, reviewed the milestone analysis one final time, and then sent Sandra Okafor an email with 3 words: "Proceed with recall." Sandra filed the formal revocation notice that afternoon. It was addressed to Franklin Hale and his business attorney. It cited the specific milestone language in Section 4 of the convertible note agreement, documented the underperformance across 3 deliverables, and formally requested the return of $150,000 within 30 days as stipulated. It was 5 pages. Every sentence was correct. I had read it 3 times before Sandra filed it. I did not tell Marcus until that evening, after dinner, sitting at the kitchen table with our hands around mugs of tea. He listened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're sure?" I said, "Yes." He nodded. "Okay." He is a good man, my husband. He does not always push back on his mother, but he knows which things are mine to decide. Franklin received the notice Thursday morning. I know this because Sandra received a call from his attorney at 2:47 in the afternoon of the same day. The attorney's position was that the milestones were substantially complete and that the revocation clause did not apply. Sandra's response, which she summarized for me in a calm and methodical 10-minute phone call, was that the documentation spoke for itself and that she was prepared to litigate the question if necessary. Franklin's attorney asked for a meeting. Sandra said she would relay the request to her client. She relayed it. I said no. I said the terms of the agreement were the terms of the agreement and that I expected compliance within the 30-day window. Sandra communicated this. Franklin called Marcus on Friday evening. I was in the other room. I did not listen, but I heard the register of the conversation. The contained tension in Marcus's voice. The careful way he said, "She's the one who made the investment, Dad." These were her terms. When Marcus came into the kitchen afterward, he looked tired. I asked if he was all right. He said yes. He said his father was shocked. I said I understood that. He said his mother didn't know yet. I said, "I know." He looked at me across the kitchen island and said, "When did you decide?" I thought about it. "The night of the party," I said. "When she said I was a babysitter." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I didn't say something then." "I know," I said. "It's all right." And I meant it. I was not angry at Marcus. I was never angry at Marcus. I was never angry at Marcus. The call from Renata came on Saturday morning at 8:41. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 48 seconds long. Her voice was controlled but strained, the kind of control that requires active effort. She said she was sure there was a misunderstanding. She said the family didn't handle business things through lawyers. She said she hoped we could all sit down and talk. She said she knew I was sensitive about certain things, and that perhaps the party had not been the right environment, and that she was sorry if anything she said had been taken the wrong way. I played it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and made myself a second cup of coffee. I want to tell you something about that moment because it is important. The apology that is structured around the phrase, taken the wrong way, is not an apology. It does not say, I was wrong. It says you were too fragile to absorb what I said correctly. It transfers the problem. In 7 years, I had received 6 of these apologies from Renata, and I had accepted every single one because I was trying to be a good daughter-in-law and because Grandma May. No, wrong story. This is mine. Because I genuinely believed in the principle of giving people the benefit of the doubt. I had given Renata approximately 6 years' worth of benefit. I had run out. I did not return her call that day. I returned it on Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning from my office, where I had a desk and a title and client accounts totaling more than $40 million under management. I was precise. I told her I had heard her message. I told her I appreciated that she had reached out. I told her that the recall of the investment was a business decision based on contractual terms and that it was not retaliatory, though I understood it might feel that way. I told her that I genuinely hoped Franklin's company would succeed and that I was open to discussing a restructured agreement at some point in the future, under revised terms. I told her that if she wanted to have a conversation about the family dinner, I was willing to do that, but it was a separate matter from the business, and I was not prepared to use one as leverage over the other in either direction. My voice was level for the entire 7-minute conversation. When I finished, there was silence on the line for about 4 seconds. Then she said, I see. That was all. I said, take care, Renata. I ended the call. Franklin's attorney and Sandra reached a resolution on the 31st day, 1 day before I would have been entitled to pursue legal remedies. Franklin returned the principal in full, less a prorated interest credit for the period of the investment. Sandra confirmed receipt. I transferred the funds into a separate account I had been building for a down payment on a small commercial property Marcus and I had been quietly evaluating. The business is mine. It has always been mine. I built it in silence, the way my mother taught me. Every number, every line, every decision. There are people who will read this story and think it is about a woman who got revenge on her mother-in-law. I want to tell you what it is actually about. It is about a woman who spent 7 years being quietly assigned a smaller version of herself by someone who found that convenient, and who eventually decided to let the facts speak the language that person was actually fluent in. Renata understood money. She understood leverage. She understood what it meant when someone held the paper. I did not do any of this to punish her. I did it because the moment she stood in front of 42 people and called me a babysitter, she told me everything I needed to know about how she had always seen me. And I decided that she deserved to know how I had always seen myself. Not loudly, not with a speech, with a document. 5 pages, correct in every sentence. Renata and I have not had a direct conversation about the retirement party since that Monday phone call. We see each other at family gatherings. She is polite. I am polite. The Rose Garden photographs still appear on her Facebook page. The first time I attended a family dinner after the recall, about 6 weeks later, she had made chicken and dumplings, a dish she had never made before in my presence, and she set it in front of me first. I said thank you. I ate 2 servings. Gloria, who had apparently been told the outline of the story by some family telephone that I was not a part of, looked at me from across the table with the slight nod of a woman who has been underestimated herself and knows what that particular grace costs. I raised my water glass very slightly toward her. She smiled and looked away. Franklin's startup eventually secured a new round of funding from an outside investor 6 months later. The platform is in beta testing. I am not involved. I genuinely hope it works. Marcus and I have dinner with his parents once a month. It is not warm. It is not cold. It is civil, and civility is something I have a great deal of respect for because it takes more discipline than either warmth or war. My mother called me the week the recall was finalized, not because she knew anything specific, but because she calls every Sunday and can apparently hear things in my voice that I cannot hear in it myself. I told her a version of the story, not all of it, enough. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You know, I never worried about you the way I worried about your brother when he was out in the world. Not because you didn't matter, because you could read a ledger." I told her I loved her. She said she knew. She always knows. If you are someone who has spent years being the capable one, the reliable one, the one everyone counts on but no one sees, I want you to hear this directly. Being overlooked is not a character flaw. It is a failure of observation on the part of the people doing the overlooking. You do not have to explain yourself loudly to correct the record. You just have to know the record. You have to keep the documentation. You have to understand the terms of the agreement you are in, even when no one else has bothered to read them. Your value does not decrease because someone in the room decided not to look closely enough. The ledger does not lie. It never has. It never will. I am sitting at my kitchen table right now with a cup of coffee and the winter light coming through the east window. The dahlias from the farmer's market are gone. It is January, but there is a small succulent on the sill that Marcus bought me for no particular reason on a Tuesday in November, and it is very much alive. I think about the woman I was at 23, sitting for a CPA exam in a room full of strangers, knowing no one was watching, doing it anyway. She was not waiting for someone to see her. She was building the thing that would make the seeing inevitable. I think about Renata at the retirement party in her navy gown, laughing at her own joke. I do not feel angry when I think about it now. I feel something closer to clarity. She told the room who she thought I was. And I let the work tell the room who I actually am. That is all it ever takes. The work, the quiet, the patience to let truth be louder than noise. Here is what I want to ask you. I am asking this directly, because this channel exists for exactly this reason. Have you ever been publicly dismissed by someone who was supposed to see you clearly, and instead of responding in the moment, you simply filed it away and let time do the work? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you filed away and what eventually came of it. Because the answers to that question are why this channel exists. Every woman who has ever been told she got lucky, who was managed instead of loved, who was counted on without being counted, deserves to have her story heard. This one is mine. Thank you for spending time here. I mean that with no performance and no qualifier. When you choose to spend an hour with a story, you are doing something generous, and I do not take it lightly. If something in Claire's story reflected something you have carried, please share it in the comments, because you might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. This channel is built on the belief that the quietest stories are often the truest ones, and that the women who never make a scene are frequently the most powerful people in the room. Hit subscribe so you never miss one. New stories every single day, each one earned, each one told with care. I will see you in the next one.